All right, I'm gonna create this video just to go over um, working with palettes and just palettes in general in NHL95. Um, so I'm using this tool called Screen Thief to take screenshots. It's this old DOS TSR, which you can run, basically run it before you run the game. And then there's a hotkey you can press to capture a screenshot. Um, So let me just do that, and then I'll capture a screenshot the conventional way. So I just want to go over palettes in general and like everything I know about palettes, and then also working with palettes in Photoshop. So yeah. So let me try to take a screenshot of Screen Thief. Okay, so I heard the beep, so I think it took it, and so let me take another screenshot just using DOSBox X. Okay, so I have two screenshots now, so. Let me open them and then we can kind of see how the basic palette in the game looks. And let me close out anything else I've got going in Photoshop for now. Apply to all. Okay, so let me just find those two screenshots I captured. Okay. Um, I think one would be in this folder actually. Yeah, let's get that. Okay, and then that's the Screen Thief one. And then just the regular DOSBox capture, I think I've got somewhere here, right here. Okay. So this screenshot from DOSBox, it's just a regular screen capture. It's RGB color. It's not indexed. Like I can make it go indexed, and look, it's got 51 colors, um, but it's not the way that the game recognizes the palettes. It's like just compressing it into the amount. Basically, Photoshop says, "Hey, I only see 51 colors, so I'm just gonna arrange these colors in the order that whatever order it arranges them in." And that's how I guess I bet there's like a scheme like the RGB value probably goes by. But it just kind of arranges it, right? So that's not necessarily what you want. Like, I mean, it depends what you're doing, right? But just in general, like you're not keeping the integrity of the game's palette, right? So here, where we've taken the screenshot with Screen Thief, um, this is actually the game palette, right? As the game organizes it. So there's like, let's see how many rows. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 rows of colors, which I believe this comes from the Rink palette, and I'll show you that in a bit. Um, and then there's 4 rows, which are the home team palette. And then there's 4 rows that are the away team palette. But then NHL95 does something weird with the last 5 colors, and those also come from the Rink palette. And I don't understand why. There's two Rink palettes in the game. There's a QFS file called Rink Pal and a QFS file called Rink Pal 2, and they both contain very similar palettes. But one of them has these last 5 colors. So obviously, I think Rink Pal has these 5 colors. So I think I don't know what Ring Pal 2 is for. I don't know if there's like a certain mode or something it needs it for, but I don't know. But in general, like Ring Pal's the palette. So I've actually extracted Ring Pal. So let's actually look at this. Um, Actually, here's something fun maybe before I do that is so I can take a palette from like another game capture I did and look what happens. Um, Yeah, so I guess it's not the team mapping. The color zone mapping isn't right, but it is changing like the colors, where those uh for the home team and away team based on the other screenshot. But it doesn't look exactly like that because um in NHL 95 for PC, 94 and 95, like there it's like a double mapping. Like not only are you mapping the colors to the palette, but then you're mapping the palettes to the sprites. Um, so um, oh, I wanted to show Rink Pal, right? So let's open up my tools folder because I did extract Rink Pal. In fact, let me get it from the QFS extractor. Um, so Rink Pal is somewhere here. Pal.act. Okay, so let's load that. And look at that, right? So this is the palette that's stored in the Rink file, right? So the Rink file, um, it obviously doesn't contain the team palettes, right? So that just all appears as black. Um, something though, okay, so there's that. Um, okay, so what else about palettes do I want to show? Um, so let's look at the sprites, right? Um, yeah, let's look at the sprites, and I'll show you like how I maybe deal with the sprites and how I maintain the color palette and so on. Um, that would be important, and especially with how I work with the fighting sprites. So let's open some of these. Let's open the fighting sprites. Let's open some regular sprites. Um, okay, so we've got some regular sprites here. Um, So these are in RGB color, right? So actually, let me open just the extracted sprite that I have not like messed around with. It's just extracted using my tools. I believe it's the PPV to BMP tool, which calls the spit to BMP tool and uh, extracts the spit file or converts the spit files to BMP files out of the PPV files, right? So that's how that works. And one of the ones I like to use is the national anthem sprite because that shows the full crest. So it's the same type of sprite that's used in Jed to like see how I think it's pretty much the same sprite that's used in Jed, right? Okay, so this is indexed. Um, and so this is extracted, ripped from the game, right? Um, so if you see the way it handles uh, colors, it's organized in a certain way. So like the crest is in the bottom right half, which is very similar. Um, when I initially was trying to figure out how to extract the sprites and everything, and originally I was not ripping it from the files, but I was ripping it from the games in a very manual process. The reason why I knew I got the palette right is because I knew that the crest was in this bottom left corner. Um, but like, how do we like maintain this palette? I guess maybe looking at the RIP version before I go further with this. Maybe it'll also give you a little bit more of an idea, even though I don't use that. I don't have to use that method to rip sprites anymore. I think it'll still be educational on how I was even able to maintain the palette there. So yeah, so here's one of the sprites or one of the screenshots I took using Screen Thief. So actually, originally when I was doing this, I was not using Screen Thief, and I was trying to rip the sprites manually and or using just a regular screenshot feature and using RGB. And the problem was um, I wasn't getting all of the colors in all of the sprites. Um, because it would only recognize the colors that are there, right? And it's in RGB. And so if I the thing I was thinking is, well, if I take a screenshot, as long as I make sure every color is configured differently in JED, the jersey editor for NHL95 PC, the DOS-based jersey editor. As long as I make every color unique, well, if I line up all of the sprites in a sprite sheet ripped this way, then I should be able to get it to at least maintain independent colors for like every sprite, right? So that was kind of the theory. Um, but yeah, again, like you just do this. Like I'm only getting like 53 colors, the 53 colors here. I think the theory was like if I took extracted all the sprites, put them in one big sheet in RGB, and then um, indexed it, assuming I had the colors independent as possible, I get like 75 colors or something, which is about how many colors are in the sprites. Um, but then, when I figured I what I figured was, and actually so this palette was actually the palette I made for ripping sprites originally, right? And it says as many independent colors as possible, but Jed just runs out of colors in the color palette, or just in NHL95, even though now I know that these are 256 color sprites, right? And they could be up to 256 colors. I think they only use like 70 something. But the dynamic colors, you only have space for 64, and there's more than 64 color zones. I think there's 68 color zones. So the last row of the crest, which is 5 pixels, it'd have to be all the same color. I thought, okay, maybe I could do it manually. Then I figured out this better. Instead of manually ripping the sprites, like I could rip the sprites on command, like whatever sprites I wanted to. It's still a manual process. And then I figured out when I went to oh right, so when I captured it through Screen Thief and I looked at the color table, like I was looking at the color table, but I knew okay, this is the game palette. But I think at some point I realized because I knew this from before in general that okay, you have a rink palette and then you have home team palette and the road palette, but I didn't quite figure out like uh what palette is this sprite using? And when the funny thing was like when I was using like when there's a referee sprite, for example, it would rip with the exact right colors. So I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Like the static colors are coming out correctly for stuff like referees. What's going on with these player sprites? And so then I think the first thing I tried was grayscale, and I quickly learned that this wasn't right because it wasn't getting up. Okay, so actually I can actually show you this, right? So if I go grayscale, well, I don't know, this might be a bad example to prove it. Probably a better example would be that sprite, the national anthem sprite, but let's see what happens while we're playing around. So let's see how many colors this guy comes out to. Index color. So it's 54 colors. So I think we had so it's still not the full amount of colors, right? Um, so let's go back and undo this grayscale. And so then I also realized, hey, that's not the right grayscale that I want. Actually, wait, is that the right grayscale? Oh, sorry. Okay, that was the right grayscale. So that did have one more than one color. The wrong grayscale to use is this one. Yeah, this one discards the color information, and this one, yeah. So sorry, the other one was the right way. This was the wrong way, and this one will get me 53 colors, I think, instead of 54. Index color, it didn't tell me. Oh, right. It went, okay, it's not even that it got me a certain amount of colors. The problem is that the way it's grayscaled, it's just random. So if you try to so again, it's I guess it's hard to explain, but it doesn't adhere to like any specific palette. So for example, if I apply the ring palette, if it was correct, the whole sprite should be black. It's not, right? So it's not adhering to that. It's reorganized the colors in whatever way it wants to reorganize it, right? Um, so going back to that, so yeah, so the thing I figured out was, hey, when you do this version of the grayscale, it keep the this is actually correct, and again, this is a bad sprite, but what I was figuring out, the thing again that unlocked it for me was the crest in the bottom left because that's exactly the way NHL 96 had it, and so I knew, okay, I'm getting the sprites exactly as they're stored in the files, um, and then I don't know. Uh, I did another video about how I guess you can view that other video. I did a part one video where I talked about how I cracked the sprite format from the file level. So if you're interested in that, you can look at that. Okay, so now I've got sprites. And so if I have this sprite over here, and I did this whole process of extracting palettes from the NHL95 palettes. It's complicated. It's like a three-step process. I don't know if anyone's interested in that. Um, but essentially, I guess I can walk through the code, right? Let me walk through the code just to just to explain it. Okay, so bin to act, this is like the master program, I guess, which the point is to convert home pals or away pals, like the team palettes from home pals and away pals bin to palettes that can be used on the sprites themselves, which is different than the way the palette is organized in the game palette. So it's slightly different. And so what I do is I open the input file, which has got to be, it has to be home pals or away pals.bin. Um, And then for the number of teams in the file, so this is set up for NHL 95, which is 28. I imagine if you wanted to do NHL 94, it'd be 26. Um, so it so the first file, it's just got the home pals at the start. It's just got um, RGB data for the palette, and for whatever reason in NHL 95, in most of the palettes, it stores the palettes divided by four for some reason. So I don't know why. I don't know if there's a technical reason why they have to limit the range, because I guess that kind of limits the range of colors you can have, right? I'm not sure why they do it that way. It's very strange. Um, but in any event, uh, yeah, so I grab all of the palette data, and then I just write it to a team palette um, act file, right? An act file is just a file that um, it's a format I can use in Photoshop, a color table. So that's why I use act file. So actually, let me look at yeah. So this is the unpack. So for Boston, they're zero. They're at index 0, right? So the team palette, I put the offset lower. The reason why the offset is lower because the game itself in the color mapping, which is the next section of the palette, or the next section of like home pals and away pals.bin, where the team palettes are stored, they're referring to the palettes at this at these numbers. This is where it's expecting the palette to start, right? It's expecting it to start down here. So is that like at spot 128, I think? I think it's, yeah, it expects the palette to start at 128, right? Which is very weird, and it's the same. It's kind of the same way the game palette is organized, but not quite. It's kind of strange. Um, Actually, in fact, maybe it is the way the game palette is when I think about it. Um, but at any event, so the one thing I found out as well though is that in the mapping process, it also expects the rink palette to be there. So I added the rink palette, and so you're seeing you can actually get the stick. Actually, no, the colors aren't right yet. This is just for the mapping process. Um, but yeah, you need to add the rink palette colors. And then the other thing I needed to do is that for these two palette colors, I had to change them to the shadow color because for whatever reason, two different sprites have different are looking at different palette values for the shadow for some reason. Um, and for whatever reason, like everything else maps properly when I do this, but the shadows didn't. I don't know if like in the game maybe they're just hard coding those shadow pixels to the right color. That's what I'm guessing they're doing because it's weird that it's overriding these colors. So I don't know if when I go to do non player sprites, is it going to mess up the colors? Do I need to use a different mapping that doesn't have these overridden? Okay, so yeah, let me finish up walking through this quickly. So yeah, so then I do this merge rink pal, which is another tool I wrote, which merges the rink palette to the team palette, and then I continue in the file in the home pals or way pals to read the color mapping, and so basically it's just every byte is represents a color zone on the sprite and it maps to a color value in the palette, right? So I needed to figure out how the color zone, yeah, this was complicated. So I needed to figure out how that mapping worked, right? And so the way I needed to store it in the palette so that the palette worked with the sprites, um, like the original sprite stored on file, is that I needed to take from the team palette I needed to refer to the index in the team palette of what the color mapping was. So it's kind of complicated, and honestly, I was shocked that it actually worked, and I didn't have to do any tweaks or anything. And also because of the way the crest is stored in the game palette versus the sprite palette, I thought maybe I'd have to do some finagling to remove the extra like lines of palette for the crest, but I didn't. So yeah, so I end up with so this is the version of the sprite that doesn't have the shadow fix in it, um, or really the rink palette merged in. Really, that's what it doesn't have. It doesn't have the rink palette merged in. Although the rink palette was used during the mapping process. This is what you get when you do the mapping process. But then when you merge it with the rink palette again, then you get the shadow, right? And then it looks great. So what else can I talk about in terms of palette? Oh, okay. So I can show you. So this is RGB, right? So the reason why I'm putting this in spreadsheets like this is because in Unity, the way to import sprites easily is to do it like this, right? And you have to organize it in this way where they're in rows, and then you finish a row, and then the next sprites start evenly below the last row of sprites. I think I might have used a batch script to do this because it was very tedious, and even the batch script took a long time and was tedious, but it was better than I guess doing like 1300 sprites manually. And I haven't done all of the sprites yet, but so the thing is now I've got it in this format, which is not paletted, right? So but I can convert it back actually. So I don't think I need for for the Unity engine remake I'm working on. I don't think I need to put it back into a paletted format. The palette mapper I'm using actually just works off of the color values, right? So I don't think I need to do that, although I do need to write a tool probably to map the extracted palette into Unity. So that's something I still need to do, but if I want to like say, okay, I want to make this paletted again, because one of the things about working with paletted sprites in Photoshop is you don't get layers anymore, which is like super annoying, right? So if you want to work with layers and stuff, and then you want to put a palette back on. So let me copy it merged. So that's Control Shift C to copy it merged and paste it. So now I've got my sprites here. Um, and then what I can do is I can turn it to index color. But if I do exact, it's not going to keep the way the colors are organized, right? If I do the image grayscale, I don't think it keeps the way the colors are organized. Or I don't know, I've never tried this. Um, let's see what happens. It's grayscale. Oh, then do I index it? What happens? Maybe it does because it's already using all of the colors. No, so it doesn't, right? So even that way, it doesn't work, right? Okay, so let's undo grayscale. Um, so the way to do it is go to index color, and then instead of going to exact, you go custom, and then you go grayscale. And now it basically puts the colors back into where they were originally, like in, so for example, the crest. So you can see like the crest got modified there. So if I load like a Boston's palette, now it's correct, right? So that's how you get it back from like RGB to paletted. So one thing I did is I created for the fighting sprites, I created a special palette because it's very hard to like edit these sprites in the grayscale because it's for me it's very hard to distinguish like the color zones. So I created a special palette. So I basically tried to independently color each section of the jersey as much as I could. Let's see if I can find uh, the palette. Uh, where is this it? Yeah, this is it. Okay. So yeah, so I tried to color it so that I could see where all the color zones are clearly and where different parts of the jersey are, right? So and then that's how I've been doing my fighting sprites. So the workflow for my fighting sprites, um, it's complicated. Let me try to explain it without taking up too much more time. So I'll have to get like a clean version of the image. So I know some of these still have like sticks in them and stuff, so I have to fix that. I try to know where the star is, and then I'll create a separate layer. So if you see on some of these, for example, I'll have an offset layer, which is where the star is. And that's important because in NHL95, all of the sprites do have an offset, right? And that tells you what the center of the sprite is. And so from the console version, I also tried to make sure I know where the center of the sprites are, um, so that, um, for the engine remake I'm doing, like it's going to be easy to create the animations. Because I should be able to basically I'm gonna be have to write a script, but I should be able to write a script which can modify the sprites I import into Unity to have the offsets. Um, okay, so the way that I've been doing this is I've been basically um, so I created a special palette on the Genesis version as well to have those as independently colored as possible. And so then what I'm doing is basically just taking this layer, duplicating it. So I have a Genesis layer and I have a PC layer, and then on the PC layer I'm starting to like basically paint over the different sections, right? And so like I'll actually the head and especially on the side profile view, it's pretty much the same as the PC version. In terms of size, like they changed the way that they map the colors a little bit. So I really just cut and paste that, and then I know that on the PC, like you've got like light stripes in the middle, so I'll try to do that there, and then do it, and then yeah. So the way the colors are organized are just a little bit different on PC, and obviously there's more zones. I think one of the challenging things I'm finding is where the stripes are in the fighting sprites. I might have to go back and make sense of it. Actually, I took one of the fighting sprites and I mapped the extracted palette onto it, and I was like, oh, this doesn't look that great, and I might have to go back. So okay, so let's say so I've created one of these sprites. So like here, for example, you can see like I painted over basically. It takes me probably about half an hour per sprite to do. So how do I convert this back into a sprite that I can use in the game? So the way I do that, probably do this at the sprite sheet level instead of an individual sprite when I finally do it. But so basically, what I do is I say, hey, and actually I need to remember the steps here. Hey, custom palette, but I'm going to load in the color zone palette. So it organizes it in the way that it's supposed to be organized. And I go okay. And so now when I go to the color table and I go grayscale, it goes back to exactly the way the PC version was. Or I can also bring in the extracted palettes. So let's look at some extracted palettes. Um, Okay, yeah, so let's look at Boston. So yeah, so there's something I'm noticing there that like, okay, that doesn't look right. Maybe the arm stripes don't look right, and so at the end, I'll do it once I finish all of the sprites. But then I'll go back and tweak it so it looks right because there is some stuff that I'm just not picking up, and then once I actually put it through the different teams, I'll be able to figure out what's messed up and what I need to fix. Let's see what else. New York Rangers. So yeah, so that gives you an idea of like the workflow I'm using for the colors, I guess.